Have you ever stood in a place where history feels so alive, so present, that you could almost hear the echoes of what once was? There are stories buried in time, tales of courage and sacrifice that shaped our world, yet remain hidden in the shadows of more famous events. Tonight, we step into one of those forgotten chapters, a story of resilience, loyalty, and a king who faced the unimaginable alone. Welcome, friend, wherever you are in the world right now, and whatever hour your own journey with us begins. We're truly glad you're here. Let us know in the comments, where are you joining from tonight, and what time is it where you are? There's something special about sharing this moment together, across miles and moments. Picture this, a fortress standing against the fading light, its stones worn by time and turmoil. This is Aminareb, a name that once inspired awe, now nearly lost to memory. And standing atop its crumbling walls is a figure silhouetted against a gathering darkness. This is King Valerius, not as a distant monarch enthroned in grandeur, but as the last guardian of a fading dream. His hand rests on the ancient hilt of his sword, not with the arrogance of command, but with the quiet resolve of someone who knows what must be done, even when hope seems little more than a whisper on the wind. What unfolds in this forgotten battlefield is more than a tale of conflict. It's a testament to the human spirit. It's about what it means to hold the line when everything else has fallen away, to stand firm not for glory, but for something deeper, honor, memory, the very soul of a people. As we journey together into the heart of this legend, we'll explore not just the events that led to that fateful moment, but the emotions, the choices, and the legacy that still resonates today. This is the story of Aminareb and the king who refused to let its light go out no matter the cost. The ground trembles with each thunderous impact as the enemy's heavy siege engines find their mark, sending showers of stone and dust cascading from the ancient walls of Aminareb. In the chaos of shouting men and the shrieks of twisting metal, one voice rises above the din, clear, resonant, and utterly unwavering. It is King Valerius, moving along the battlements with a presence that seems to momentarily still the panic around him. He calls out to his few remaining guards, not with a cry of desperation, but with the steady command of a leader who has faced long odds before. They are not an army, they are a brotherhood, bound by loyalty, and they rally to him without hesitation, their resolve hardening as they race to reinforce the heavily damaged eastern gate. But even the strongest oak must eventually splinter. With a deafening crack that echoes across the courtyard, the massive iron reinforced gate gives way, shattered inward by the relentless assault of a monstrous battering ram. The sight of that breach, that gaping maw into the heart of their sanctuary, could have broken any remaining spirit. Instead, it ignites something fierce within the king. Knowing that a defensive stand now would mean certain slaughter within the walls, Valerius makes a choice that defies all conventional wisdom. He seizes a fallen guard's shield, raises his own sword high, and with a cry that is part roar and part promise, he leads a desperate, shocking countercharge directly into the breach. What follows is not a battle of strategy, but a raw, visceral struggle for survival. The king and his guards meet the onslaught of invaders head-on in the confined space of the broken gateway, creating a choke point of sheer defiance. Blades clash, shields splinter, and the air grows thick with the sounds of combat. For a few precious, impossible minutes, they hold. They push the enemy back, step by bloody step, out from the gateway and into the field beyond. But victory, if it can even be called that, comes at a devastating cost. When the last invader falls or retreats, the king stands breathless, his armor dented and stained, surrounded by the still forms of half his loyal guards. These were not just soldiers, they were friends, men who had served him for years, and their sacrifice has purchased nothing more than a few moments of time. The outer courtyard is now vulnerable, the inner keep painfully exposed, as the enemy war drums begin to pound again in the distance, a grim signal of their regrouping and preparation for a final, overwhelming assault. A profound realization settles over Valerius. He looks from the faces of his fallen to the weary, determined few who remain at his side. Conventional tactics, bravery alone, even the sacrifice of good men, it will only delay the inevitable. They cannot win this fight through strength of arms. The mathematics of the battle are brutally clear. In this crushing moment of clarity, a new and terrifying thought begins to form in the king's mind. He must find another way, a path not to victory, but to preservation. He must protect his people, the civilians huddled and terrified in the keep behind him, even if the only currency left to spend is his own life. With the enemy's roar drawing ever closer, a desperate search begins. King Valerius moves through the smoke-filled great hall, his eyes scanning the familiar stones for any possibility he might have overlooked. It is in this moment of near despair that a glimmer of chance reveals itself not through force, but through memory. His gaze falls upon a massive, age-worn statue of a former ruler, now toppled and shattered by the bombardment. But the collapse has not merely created ruin, it has exposed a secret. Behind the broken marble and dust, a dark, narrow opening yawns in the wall, a forgotten architectural relic from a more cautious age. This is no grand avenue of escape, but a tight, cramped passageway, a final thread of hope woven into the very bones of the fortress by its long-dead builders. Without a moment to lose, Valerius acts. He directs the last group of terrified civilians and his few wounded, limping soldiers toward this slender chance at life. His voice is low and urgent, a stark contrast to the battle cries of before, as he ushers them into the cold, waiting darkness. Each face that passes him is a story, a life he swore to protect, and the weight of that oath presses down on him with an almost physical force. He knows, with a certainty that settles deep in his soul, that he cannot follow them. Someone must seal the passage. Someone must make the enemy believe that all within these walls have either perished or fled by other means. That duty is his, and his alone. As the last citizen disappears into the shadowy tunnel, the king begins the grim, final task of barricading the entrance, heaving chunks of broken statue and rubble to obscure the hope he has just gifted to his people. The timing is terrifyingly precise. The last stone is shoved into place, just as the harsh shouts of enemy scouts echo through the adjacent corridor. They have breached the inner sanctum. Valerius freezes, pressed against the cold wall, listening to their calls as they fan out, searching for survivors, for plunder, for the king himself. To lead them away from this hidden door, to draw their attention entirely toward himself, becomes his immediate, instinctive mission. He does not hesitate. Pushing away from the wall, he creates a deliberate noise, a scuffle of boot on stone, and then he is moving, not toward safety, but deeper into the heart of the fortress, leading the hunt away from the secret his people now travel. The sound of their fleeing footsteps has long since faded, swallowed by the stone passage. Now, the only sounds that reach him are the growing clamor of his pursuers and the heavy, solitary echo of his own boots on the flagstones. In this moment, a profound and chilling isolation envelops him, the last tether to his people, to his duty as their protector in the physical sense, has been severed. He is completely and utterly alone, yet within that solitude there is a stark, powerful peace. He has fulfilled his ultimate purpose. Their survival is now their own story to write. His story is narrowing to this final, darkened corridor. He has accepted the likely end of his own tale, so that theirs might continue. The fortress, once a symbol of his power, has become his solitary arena, and he walks into its depths, ready to meet whatever fate awaits. He does not retreat into the shadows of the inner keep. Instead, King Valerius turns and begins a slow, deliberate climb up the central stairwell, each step taking him higher into the stone heart of his fortress. The air grows colder, the sounds of the enemy's celebration below becoming a muffled din. He ascends past chambers that once echoed with counsel and laughter, now silent and empty. His destination is the highest point of Amon Ereb, the ancient Watchtower, a skeletal finger of stone pointing toward the heavens. For centuries, its purpose was to offer a sweeping view of the surrounding lands, a tool for protection and vigilance. Tonight, it will serve a far more personal and perilous purpose. Emerging onto the windswept platform, the full scope of his predicament unfolds beneath him. The last light of day is bleeding from the sky, painting the world in shades of deep purple and orange, but the scene below is anything but peaceful. He sees them now, not as a faceless horde, but as a meticulously organized force. Countless campfires spark to life like a field of angry stars, and the disciplined movements of patrols and supply trains speak of a highly efficient war machine. His eyes, sharpened by years of command, sweep across the organized chaos until they find what they are seeking, the command tent. It is larger than the others, flanked by standard bearers, and surrounded by a personal guard of exceptionally well-armored soldiers. And there, standing before it, is a figure whose very posture radiates cold authority. This is General Carthos, a name spoken in fearful whispers across the land. Valerius knows his reputation all too well, a man for whom mercy is a strategic weakness and surrender is not an option. Carthos does not take prisoners, he erases history. A new plan, born of desperation and a deep understanding of his enemy's nature, crystallizes in Valerius's mind. A hidden defense is no longer enough. Carthos would not be satisfied with simply holding the fortress. He would send out hunting parties, scouring the countryside for any who had fled. The escaped civilians, slow-moving and vulnerable, would be found and slaughtered before they ever reached the sanctuary of the distant woods. To save them, Valerius must offer Carthos a prize so tempting, so personally infuriating, that it consumes his entire attention. He must become more than a king. He must transform into a symbol, a blatant, undeniable provocation. He must make Carthos forget about everything else: the fortress, the escape routes, the scattered survivors, and focus solely on him. A cold knot of doubt tightens in his stomach. Is this the courageous last stand of a sovereign? Or is it the final, foolish act of a prideful man who refuses to accept defeat? He closes his eyes, and the memory that answers this doubt is not of his crown or his throne, but of a young woman's face in the great hall, smudged with dirt and streaked with tears, clutching a child to her chest as he guided her toward the hidden passage. Her eyes held not a demand for her king to be a hero, but a silent, desperate plea for a chance to live. That memory, more than any oath of office, hardens his resolve into something as unyielding as the tower stone beneath his hands. His own fate became secondary the moment he made that choice. Turning from the edge, his movements are now sure and purposeful. In the center of the tower platform lies the signal pyre, a construction of dry timber and pitch that has not been lit in generations. It was never meant for this. It was a beacon of warning or celebration, not a funeral pyre for a kingdom. Taking a flint and steel from a small, rusted box beside it, Valerius kneels and begins to strike. The first spark catches a tuft of dried moss, glowing feebly. He cups his hands around it, shielding the fledgling flame from the wind, feeding it with smaller twigs until it gains strength and confidence. Then, with a deep breath that feels like his first in hours, he thrusts the burning kindling into the heart of the pyre. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, with a soft whoosh that seems to suck the sound from the world, the pitch ignites. Flames, hungry and brilliant, explode upward, tearing through the twilight. They leap toward the emerging stars, a violent, beautiful defiance against the darkening sky. The light is immense, casting long, dancing shadows down the tower walls and illuminating the king's face, which is set in an expression of serene acceptance. Below, the reaction is instantaneous. The murmur of the enemy camp shifts into a roar of confusion and alarm. He can see figures pointing, soldiers scrambling to form ranks, and all movement seems to orient toward this new, blazing heart of the conflict. He has thrown down the gauntlet. He has given them a target, and from this moment on, every thought, every arrow, every soldier under General Carthos' command will be directed at one man, alone in a tower of fire, buying precious time with his own life. The sound of heavy boots on stone becomes a thunderous drumbeat echoing up the stairwell, a grim announcement that the time for stealth has passed. Valerius stands motionless for a heartbeat, his mind not on the coming fight, but on the intricate, forgotten blueprints of his home. He remembers the stories whispered by old masons, the hidden mechanics built into the walls for just such a dark hour. As the first wave of armored invaders rounds the final curve of the spiral staircase, their faces contorted with battle fury, the king does not raise his sword. Instead, he slams his boot down on a specific, slightly raised flagstone that seems no different from any other. The effect is immediate and terrifying. A section of the staircase beneath the lead soldiers simply vanishes, the cleverly counterweighted stones pivoting downward to drop a dozen men into a black pit filled with the sharpened stakes that had been waiting in silence for decades. Their screams are cut short by the sickening sounds from below, and the charge behind them grinds to a horrified halt, choked by the sudden gap in their path. Valerius does not wait for their shock to subside. He is already moving, drawing them deeper into his lethal maze. He leads them down a narrow corridor lined with faded tapestries, a place that feels more like a gallery than a battleground. The enemy, now more cautious, follows in a tight, angry pack. As they pass a particular statue of a forgotten warrior, Valerius pulls a rusted iron lever disguised within its shield. With a great groaning of aged mechanisms, a massive stone block swings down from the ceiling like a giant's fist, crushing several attackers and sealing the passage behind the main group, cutting their force in two and trapping those who remain with him. Panic begins to spread through their ranks. This is not the straightforward slaughter they anticipated. It is a hunt where the prey is turning the very ground against them. Each trap he springs is a piece of his heritage sacrificed, a final expenditure of his kingdom's hidden wealth. Every collapsing archway and falling net of heavy chains is one less secret, one less defense for a future that will never come. He spends this inheritance without hesitation, each mechanism bought with the currency of seconds and minutes, for the people stumbling through the dark woods beyond the fortress walls. He corners himself deliberately, sealing off exit after exit, until the only path left is upward, back toward the tower and the fading glow of the signal fire. He is a man methodically building his own cage, ensuring that every enemy eye remains fixed on him. When the final corridor is blocked and the last trap is triggered, the reality of his situation becomes absolute. There is no retreat. He stands now in a high, circular chamber beneath the tower, a room with only one entrance, the door through which the enemy will come. The calculated commander gives way to the primal warrior. He meets the next group to break through not with tricks, but with cold, brutal efficiency. His sword work is an economy of motion, each parry and thrust designed to maximize chaos and inflict debilitating wounds on the front ranks, creating a tangle of fallen bodies and shattered armor that becomes an obstacle for those pushing in behind them. He is no longer just fighting men. He is engineering a bottleneck of suffering and confusion. From his command post below, General Carthos receives report after report of the losses. His initial irritation at the king's defiance curdles into a cold, consuming rage. This is not a battle, it is an insult. A single man, cornered and outnumbered, is humiliating his finest troops with the bones of a dead fortress. The calculated risk of losing more men to these ancient tricks is no longer a strategic consideration. It is a personal affront. With a snarl that silences the officers around him, Carthos draws his own infamous curved blade. He shoves his way through his own soldiers, his presence parting the ranks like a ship cutting through a sea. The hunt is over. He will personally tear the heart from this stubborn king and present it to his army as a lesson. The final assault on the tower is now led by the general himself, his eyes fixed on the staircase, his mind focused on nothing but the solitary figure waiting above. The relentless pursuit has ebbed, if only for a few stolen moments. Valerius finds himself backing through a heavy, splintered oak door, his shoulder slamming against it to bar the way, expecting to hear the pounding of fists and blades on the other side. But the only sound is his own ragged breathing and the distant, muffled chaos from other parts of the fortress. He turns, leaning against the wood, and the sight that greets him makes his heart stutter. He is not in an armory or a barracks. He has stumbled into a sanctuary of silence, a place the war has not yet found the time to defile. This is the royal archive. Dust motes dance in slivers of fading light that cut through high, narrow windows. illuminating towering shelves that groan under the weight of memory. Scrolls of parchment, bound in faded leather and sealed with wax, are stacked beside delicate models of the fortress from ages past. Tapestries line the walls, their threads depicting coronations, harvest festivals, and treaties signed under summer suns. A vibrant, peaceful history that feels like a dream from another world. His eyes sweep across the faces of his ancestors in their portraits, their painted gazes seeming to hold a mixture of judgment and profound sorrow. This is not merely a room, it is the soul of Amon Ereb, the very essence of what he is fighting and dying to preserve. It is the weight of every life that came before him, and the profound silence feels heavier than any armor he has ever worn. Driven by a need to connect to that legacy one final time, his hands move almost of their own accord. He ignores the grand treatises on law and the detailed ledgers of trade. His fingers, stained with ash and blood, find a small, unassuming scroll tucked away in a corner, its casing made of simple, unvarnished wood, unlike the gold-leafed cases surrounding it. He unrolls it carefully. The script is ancient, the language formal and slightly archaic, speaking of the founding of the fortress. It tells of the first stones laid not just for defense, but upon a place of deep, terrestrial power. His eyes race over the words, skimming past passages about ley lines and convergences of energy that he had always dismissed as the superstitious ramblings of a less enlightened age. Then he sees it. A passage, circled faintly by some long-dead scholar, speaks of the Heartstone. It was said to be a primal fragment of the world's core, buried deep in a chamber beneath the fortress's deepest foundations. The text is vague, warning that it does not grant power so much as amplify what is already within a person. Their courage, their fear, their resolve, their despair. It would magnify the very essence of his being, for good or for ill, and the cost. The writing grows darkly metaphorical. It spoke of a burning from within, a sacrifice of spirit, a price paid not in blood, but in the very fiber of one's soul. To previous kings, including his own pragmatic father, it was a fireside tale, a metaphor for the burdens of leadership, never to be taken literally. Now, those poetic warnings feel terrifyingly concrete. The sounds of combat are growing louder again, the shouts of Carthos's men filtering through the stone, searching room by room. They will find this door soon. All his strategies have been spent, all his tricks exhausted. He is down to his last few moments, and the strength left in his sword arm. Victory is an impossibility that faded hours ago, but an end, a meaningful end, one that could ensure his people's escape is complete, one that could turn his final stand into something more than a martyr's death. That possibility now flickers before him, as dangerous and alluring as a flame in a room full of gunpowder. The dread is a cold stone in his gut. This is not courage. It is a desperation that borders on madness, a willingness to grasp at mythical straws when all real options have vanished. What if the legends are true? What if the cost is a torment worse than any physical death? But then his mind offers him the counterargument, the only one that matters now. What if it works? What if he can draw every ounce of his resolve, every last shred of his love for his people, and the Heartstone can magnify it into a final, unforgettable act that sears their freedom into history? The decision crystallizes not with a shout, but with a slow, steadying breath. The dread does not leave him, but it is now joined by iron-hard determination. that feels older than the stones around him. He must find it. He rolls the scroll and tucks it into his tunic, a new map in a world that has run out of them. The archive door shudders under the first blow from an axe on the other side. His respite is over. His final, most desperate journey is about to begin. The archive door shudders violently, splintering under the force of another axe blow from the other side. There is no more time for thought, only for instinct forged in the fire of desperation. Valerius's eyes dart across the stone floor, past the shelves of scrolls, searching for the anomaly described in the ancient text. And there it is, a section of flagstone, slightly larger than the others, its edges worn smooth, not by footsteps, but by the subtle, infrequent movement of a hidden mechanism. He drops to his knees, his fingers finding a nearly invisible seam. He digs his nails into the tiny gap, muscles straining against the incredible weight of the stone. For a terrifying second, nothing gives. Then, with a deep, grating rumble that sounds like the mountain itself groaning in protest, the massive slab pivots sideways, revealing a yawning blackness and the first few steps of a steep, narrow staircase that descends into the absolute unknown. A wave of cold, damp air, smelling of wet rock and centuries of undisturbed silence, washes over him. The shouting and pounding at the main door grows more frantic. He seizes a torch from a wall sconce, thrusting it into the opening to push back the oppressive dark, and then he is moving, pulling the stone closed above him with a final, echoing thud that seals him in. The world of light, noise, and war vanishes, replaced by an enveloping stillness, so complete it feels like a physical presence. The only sounds are the frantic crackle of his torch and the harsh rhythm of his own breathing. He descends, each step taking him further from the battle and deeper into the foundational bones of his kingdom, into a place of legends and ghosts. The staircase gives way to a low, arched corridor, its walls pressing in close. Here, the air is thick with the smell of age and forgotten things. His torchlight, a fragile bubble of illumination in the immense dark, dances across the walls, revealing that they are not plain stone. They are covered in intricate ancient carvings, their lines worn soft by time, but still telling their stories. He sees scenes of the first king raising the foundation stone of Amon Ereb, of queens overseeing bountiful harvests, of scribes recording laws, of astronomers charting the stars from the very tower he just left. This is not a mere crypt for the dead. It is a chronicle of a civilization, a tapestry of hope and ambition woven into the rock itself. And in the profound silence, the whispers begin. They are not audible sounds, but impressions that form directly in his mind, echoes of the legacy he carries. He feels the weight of his ancestors' gazes, not accusatory, but heavy with expectation. He sees the ghost of his father's disappointed frown, not for the lost battle, but for the desperate, superstitious path he now walks. The greatest fear, however, is his own. It rises from the pit of his stomach, the crushing guilt of a king who led his people to the brink of ruin. Had his strategies been too cautious, too bold? Had he missed some crucial sign, some diplomatic overture that could have prevented this war? Every face of the fallen guards flashes before his eyes, and each one feels like a personal failure. He is not just walking through a tunnel, he is walking through the museum of his own reign, and every exhibit is a question he cannot answer. He stumbles, his boot catching on a loose stone, and the torch nearly slips from his grasp. In that moment of near panic, a clarity emerges from the chaos of his thoughts. The carvings on the walls are not just tales of triumph. If he looks closer, his light reveals other scenes. A king kneeling in grief after a lost harvest, a queen weathering the scorn of her court for an unpopular treaty, a military leader staring at the maps of a retreated front. They are all there, the stumbles and the setbacks, woven into the same history as the victories. Their legacy was not one of perfection, but of perseverance. They did not build a kingdom by never failing. They built it by continuing to build even after they had failed. True courage, he realizes with a jolt that steadies his hand, is not the absence of fear or failure. It is the choice to stand back up, to find one more move to make, one more breath to take, even when the game appears utterly lost. His own defeat does not erase their legacy. His response to it will become a part of it. Emboldened by this fragile peace, he pushes onward. The corridor begins to slope downward more steeply, the air growing warmer and carrying a new, sharp, mineral scent, like the air after a lightning strike. And then he hears it, a sound that has no place in this silent tomb, a low, rhythmic thrum, so deep it is felt more than heard, a vibration that travels up through the soles of his boots and into his bones. It is the pulse of the mountain, a slow, powerful beat that seems to grow stronger with every step he takes. It is no longer a legend from a scroll. It is a physical reality pulling him forward, a siren's call resonating from the very heart of the world. The darkness ahead is no longer empty, it is waiting. The corridor ends not in another chamber, but in a vast, natural cavern that takes his breath away. The air hums with a palpable energy, thick and heavy, and the source of that power is unmistakable. In the very center of the cavern, resting upon a simple altar of unworked black stone, is the Heartstone. It is nothing like he imagined. It isn't a jewel of fiery brilliance or a gem of dazzling light. It is a crystalline formation, roughly the size of his own heart, that seems to contain a captured, soft, internal luminescence, pulsing in a slow, gentle rhythm that matches the deep thrum vibrating through the floor. It casts a serene, ethereal glow across the cavern walls, illuminating the altar and the ancient, meticulously carved inscriptions that cover its base. Driven by a force beyond curiosity, Valerius steps forward, his eyes scanning the warnings etched into the stone. The language is archaic, the symbols stark and unforgiving. They speak not of glorious power, but of brutal exchange. They warn that the stone does not give, it merely amplifies, and in doing so, it consumes. It demands a sacrifice equal to the strength it grants. The price is not measured in gold or blood, but in the very essence of the user. The inscriptions speak of a burning away of the self, a forfeiture of memory, a dimming of the spirit. Some passages suggest a wielder might lose all recollection of their past, becoming a hollow vessel of pure, focused will. Others warn of a half-life, an existence where the user is forever separated from the warmth of emotion, a ghost trapped between action and feeling. To touch the stone is to gamble your soul against the immediate need for strength. His hand hovers just inches from the crystalline surface, trembling. This is the moment of true choice. Every battle, every sacrifice, every strategic retreat has led to this precipice. Is saving the physical lives of his people worth the annihilation of everything that makes him him? Will the king who fought for them still exist after this, or will he become a nameless, memoryless weapon, a final tool to be used and discarded? The weight of his own identity, the love for his late wife, the pride in his daughter's first words, the camaraderie with his fallen captains, the countless small moments that built the man named Valerius presses down on him, a treasure more precious than any crown. Above him, the decision is made for him. A tremendous, shuddering boom echoes through the cavern, so powerful it dislodges a shower of dust and small stones from the ceiling. The sound is unmistakable. The final inner gate has been shattered. The thunder of hundreds of booted feet and the triumphant roar of General Carthos' soldiers filter down through the rock, a grim symphony announcing the end. They are in the great hall. They are moments from finding the archive, moments from discovering the hidden door. His people are still out there, vulnerable in the dark. There is no more time for fear, for doubt, for the luxury of a self. With a final, shuddering breath that is equal parts acceptance and surrender, King Valerius closes the remaining distance and places both hands upon the Heartstone. The surge is not one of raw, violent power. There is no explosion of light, no feeling of invincibility flooding his limbs. Instead, it is a wave of immense, terrifying clarity. It feels as if a lens has been placed over his mind, sharpening his thoughts to a razor's edge. Every doubt, every fear, every distracting emotion is not erased, but rather put into a stark, new perspective. His love for his people is no longer a feeling. It is a mathematical certainty, an absolute directive. His duty is no longer a concept. It is a physical law as real as gravity. The energy flows into him, and he feels it burning, not unpleasantly, but with a profound intensity, as it seeks the currency to pay for its own use. And then he feels the payment begin. It is not a violent tearing, but a gentle, inexorable fading. The memory of his wife's face, which he could recall with photographic detail just moments ago, softens at the edges, the specific shade of her eyes becoming just a concept of blue. The sound of his daughter's laughter, a sound that could lift him from the deepest melancholy, becomes a beautiful, abstract idea of joy without the specific auditory memory attached to it. It is as if someone is gently lifting the most precious, painted tiles from the mosaic of his soul, leaving behind only the cement that held them in place, the knowledge that he loved them, but not the visceral, living memory of that love. The stone's light dims, its soft pulse fading to a dull glow as the last of its ancient energy transfers into him, its purpose fulfilled. He opens his eyes and rises to his feet. He is still Valerius. He knows his name, his title, his mission, but he feels less, lighter in a hollow way, as if the ballast of a lifetime of experience has been jettisoned to make room for a single, overwhelming purpose. The man who loved and laughed and doubted is still there, but seen now through a pane of thick, clear glass, separated from himself. The king looks down at his hands, expecting them to be different, but they are the same. The transformation is internal, a chilling trade where ultimate focus was purchased with the warmth of his own past. He turns from the now dull altar, his movements precise, his mind silent of everything but the path ahead and the enemy above. The time for hesitation is over. It was left behind in the fading light of the stone. The climb back up from the deep places feels like surfacing from a dream. The narrow staircase is the same. The heavy stone door at its top is unchanged, but the man who pushes it open is not the same man who closed it. Valerius emerges from the archive into a scene of controlled chaos. The oak door he barred is now a splintered ruin, and the room is filled with enemy soldiers ransacking the shelves. Their backs turn to him, their laughter coarse as they toss priceless scrolls aside like kindling. They do not hear him over their own noise. He moves. It is not the practiced, powerful movement of a seasoned warrior. It is something else entirely. His body reacts before his mind can form the thought. He crosses the space between them in a blur, his sword a silver arc in the dim light. He does not feel the impact of the parries, the strain in his muscles, the calculation of angles and feints. He simply sees the openings, and his body fills them with precise, devastating strikes. 3 soldiers fall before the others even register his presence. Their shouts of alarm are cut short, their faces frozen in expressions of shock that gives way to terror. They are professional soldiers, veterans of a dozen campaigns, and they are completely outmatched by this silent, unstoppable force that has appeared among them. He feels the power of the Heartstone coursing through him, a cold, electric current that sharpens his senses to an impossible degree. He can hear the individual rustle of a scroll unraveling across the room, can see the minute shift in an opponent's weight that telegraphs their next thrust, can feel the subtle vibration in the stone floor from the movements of men 3 chambers away. It is intoxicating, this absolute mastery of the moment. Yet, within this terrifying clarity, there is a profound and growing void. With each enemy that falls, a piece of his own history seems to dissolve. The face of the sword master who trained him as a boy, a memory he had carried for decades, suddenly loses its features, becoming a smooth, nameless mask. The triumphant feeling of his first tournament victory, a cornerstone of his confidence, evaporates into a simple, dry fact. He won. The emotion, the sweat, the roar of the crowd, it is all gone, leaving only the hollow shell of the event. He is paying for this power with the very substance of his soul, and each moment spent using it spends another irreplaceable memory. His purpose, however, remains, etched into his being with diamond clarity. He is not here to reclaim his throne or to achieve a glorious victory. He is a bulwark. His only goal is to hold this ground, to be an immovable object that breaks the advancing tide long enough for the night to fully embrace the land. Out there, in the deepening dark, his people are moving, slow and vulnerable. Every second, he keeps the enemy's attention focused. Here is a second. They are not being hunted. He fights his way out of the archive and into the grand corridor that leads to the throne room, not as a king returning to his seat of power, but as a guardian, deliberately positioning himself in the most obvious, most symbolic choke point available. The great carved doors of the throne room are hanging from broken hinges. Inside, a larger contingent of Carthos's elite guard has taken position, believing the fortress's heart now secured. They see him enter alone, and a few of them smirk, expecting an easy end to a stubborn foe. Their confidence lasts for the span of a single breath. Valerius meets them without a sound, his movements a brutal and beautiful economy of force. He weaves through their ranks, his blade finding gaps in armor, exploiting overextended attacks, turning their own strength against them. He is not fighting men, he is solving a violent, moving equation, and he is the only answer. The tide of battle inside the room turns so swiftly, it leaves the remaining soldiers disoriented and fearful, their numerical advantage rendered meaningless by his supernatural precision. From his command post in the conquered Great Hall, a messenger breathlessly delivers the news to General Carthos. The report is incoherent at first, speaking of a demon, a ghost, a whirlwind of death that has single-handedly cleared the throne room. Carthos's initial irritation, the annoyance he felt at the king's continued resistance, finally shatters. This is no longer a military problem to be solved with numbers and siege engines. This is a personal challenge, an affront to his authority and his reputation as an unstoppable conqueror. A cold, grim smile touches his lips. The time for sending soldiers is over. The time for sending a message has begun. He barks orders to his personal retinue, his most feared and formidable warriors, men who have never known defeat. He himself picks up his heavy, curved blade, the metal gleaming with a cruel light. The prey has become something worthy of the hunter's full attention. The final act of the siege will not be a mopping up operation. It will be a duel, and Carthos intends to personally carve the moral of this story into the stone of the fallen king's throne. The grand hall falls into an abrupt and chilling silence, the scattered skirmishes dying away as a new presence commands the space. Through the shattered main doors strides General Carthos, a mountain of black iron and cold fury. His armor is not ornate but brutally functional, each plate scarred from countless battles, and the sheer physicality of him seems to darken the room. He moves with a predator's grace that belies his size, his eyes, sharp and calculating, fixed solely on King Valerius. He dismisses his own soldiers with a contemptuous wave, the space clearing until only the two of them stand facing each other across the blood-stained flagstones. A low, gravelly laugh echoes within his helmet. So this is the famed king of Amon Ereb. Carthos's voice booms, devoid of warmth or respect, the last monarch of a fallen house, reduced to skulking in his own ruins. You fight well for a ghost, but your performance is at its end. He takes a slow, deliberate step forward, his heavy boots crushing a fallen scroll underfoot. I have seen your kind before, the noble last stand, the glorious death for the songs. It is a tedious and wasteful cliché. He gestures broadly to the empty hall, to the silence where a court should be. Where is your court, your army, your glory? You stand alone in a tomb of your own making. He stops, just beyond the reach of Valerius's sword, and removes his helmet. The face revealed is not one of mindless brutality, but of cold, intelligent cruelty, etched with the lines of a man who has won every war through calculation, not just force. I am a practical man, your majesty. I do not wish to waste more of my valuable soldiers scraping your stubborn corpse from these stones. Your defiance is spent. Your tricks are exhausted. You have lost. He leans forward slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, mocking whisper that somehow carries through the entire hall. But I will offer you a trade, a king's ransom for a king's life. Tell me where you sent the rats that fled this sinking ship. Give me the direction of your fleeing civilians, and you may keep your life. You can even keep your title as a vassal in my new order. A hollow crown is better than no crown at all, is it not? The offer hangs in the air, a venomous temptation wrapped in a threat. It is a masterful stroke of psychological warfare, designed to corrupt the very notion of sacrifice. But Valerius does not move. He does not speak. He simply stands, his breath even, his gaze unwavering. His silence is not the quiet of defeat or consideration. It is a wall. It is the final, unbreachable defense for his people. In that silence, he speaks volumes. He tells Carthos that some things are not for trade, that a king's true title is not granted by a crown, but by his loyalty to those he swore to protect. Carthos reads the answer in the king's eyes long before a word could be spoken. A flicker of genuine annoyance, then cold rage, passes over his features. With a roar that shakes dust from the rafters, he brings his massive, curved blade to bear. Then die with your silence. The duel begins not with a testing of blades, but with an avalanche of force. Carthos's first overhead strike is meant to split Valerius in two, a blow that would shatter ordinary steel. Valerius meets it, not with a block, but with a precise deflection, using the general's own immense strength to turn the blade aside. The sound of the impact is a deafening clap of thunder that echoes through the hollow hall. What follows is a brutal symphony of opposing styles. Carthos's power and relentless pressure, each swing of his blade, a killing stroke meant to overwhelm and break. Valerius's fluidity and precision, a phantom guided by the Heartstone's cold clarity. He moves with an unnatural speed, his body anticipating attacks a heartbeat before they are launched, his parries and counters a blur of motion. He lands a stinging cut on the general's armored shoulder, another on his thigh where the plate joins, drawing first blood. For a few moments, it seems the supernatural edge might prevail. But General Carthos is a student of war, and his greatest weapon is his mind. He recognizes that this is not the fighting style of the man he studied on campaign maps. This is something different, something detached and impossibly fast. He ceases his reckless offensive, his eyes narrowing as he shifts tactics. He begins feinting, probing with half strikes, designed not to hit, but to observe the king's reactions. He studies the rhythm, the almost predictable perfection of every dodge. He sees that for all its speed, the king's movement lacks the subtle improvisation of a seasoned warrior reading an opponent. It is a flawless, yet somehow impersonal, execution. Seeing his opening, Carthos launches a complex combination. A feint high, a true thrust low, and as Valerius moves with lightning speed to evade, the general does the unexpected. He commits fully to the missed thrust, using his own momentum to pivot his entire body, and brings the heavy pommel of his sword around in a devastating, close-range arc. It is not a swordsman's move, it is a brawler's trick. It connects with a sickening crack against Valerius's side, right where his breastplate meets the backplate. The force of the blow is immense, not enough to pierce, but more than enough to buckle the armor and drive the shattered pieces inward. Valerius stumbles back, a sharp, ragged gasp escaping his lips, the first sound of pain he has made. The cold, focused energy of the Heartstone wavers for a critical second. The shock of the impact, a spike of pure, personal agony that the stone's influence cannot fully mute. He looks down to see a shard of his own broken armor protruding, and a dark stain already spreading across his tunic beneath the steel. A triumphant, grim smile spreads across General Carthos's face. He has found the flaw in his phantom opponent. The king may be fast, but he is still flesh and bone, and now he is wounded. The air in his lungs feels like shards of glass, each ragged breath a painful reminder of the broken armor digging into his side. Valerius stumbles away from the triumphant glare of General Carthos, his vision swimming, retreating not in a tactical withdrawal, but in a desperate, unsteady search for a moment's respite. He finds himself in a long gallery adjacent to the throne room, a place that was once a celebration of his lineage. Now it is a hall of ghosts. His shoulder collides with a marble statue, sending it toppling to the floor, where it shatters into 100 pieces. The figure was that of his great-grandfather, the king who first established the royal archives. The irony is a bitter taste in his mouth. He leans heavily against the wall, his hand leaving a smeared print of blood on a vast, intricately woven tapestry. His eyes focus on the scene depicted there. It is his own coronation. The threads of gold and crimson show a younger version of himself, head held high, the crown being placed upon his brow by the steady hands of the high priest. He remembers the overwhelming weight of that crown, not physically, but the immense responsibility it represented. He remembers the swell of pride in his chest, the hopeful cheers of the crowd, the way the sun had streamed through the stained glass, painting the world in brilliant, optimistic light. He can feel the memory, vivid and warm. Then a coldness seeps through him, a chill that has nothing to do with his wound. The vibrant memory in his mind begins to fray at the edges. The specific melody of the coronation hymn, a tune he has hummed to himself for years, dissolves into a generic, formless sound. The proud, tear-filled face of his mother in the front row softens, her distinct features blurring into the vague impression of a smiling woman. The intricate feeling of the heavy royal robes on his shoulders becomes just a fact. He wore robes, devoid of the sensory memory of their texture and weight. It is not fading with time, it is being actively erased, siphoned away. The Heartstone's power, which moments ago felt like a clarifying fire, now reveals its true, vampiric nature. It is not granting him strength, it is trading his past for a fleeting present. A wave of dizziness forces him to his knees before another tapestry. This one shows a summer festival, and at its center, a woman with hair the color of wheat and a laugh that could quiet the entire court. Ilara, his queen, his love, the pain of losing her to a sudden winter fever 5 years ago, was a wound that never fully healed, a hollow space he carried with him every day. Now, as he reaches a trembling hand toward her woven image, that hollow space is being excavated with a terrifying finality. The sound of her voice, the exact shade of green in her eyes, the way her hand felt in his, these are the pillars of his grief, and his grief is a monument to her love. One by one, the Heartstone's energy burns them away. The sharp, aching sorrow is replaced by a flat, empty knowledge. He knows he loved her. He knows she is gone. But the living, breathing memory of that love, the very thing that made him who he was, is turning to ash inside him. He is not just losing a memory, he is losing the part of his soul that was shaped by it. He crawls forward, his strength failing, until he collapses before a small, beautifully carved wooden chest, its lid splintered open by looters. Inside, amid scattered trinkets, is a child's wooden sword and a small, painted portrait. The portrait is of a boy with his own serious eyes and Ilara's smile. His son, little Loras, sent away to a distant, safe cousin at the first sign of war. His most cherished possession was the memory of the boy's 5th birthday, of teaching him how to hold this very wooden sword, of the child's intense concentration, giving way to a giggle of pure joy. Valerius clutches the tiny sword now, his knuckles white, trying to anchor himself to that moment, to the feeling of his son's small, trusting hand in his. But the anchor will not hold. The stone is relentless. The memory flickers like a guttering candle. The sound of that specific, beloved laugh becomes muted, then silent. The image of his son's face, so clear and precious, begins to lose its definition. He can feel the love, the protective, ferocious love of a father, but it is becoming disconnected from the boy who inspired it. It is a love without a face, without a name, a powerful emotion, adrift in a growing void. A silent scream builds in his throat. This is not a price paid in pain or blood. This is a damnation. He is presiding over the funeral of his own identity, and he is the sole mourner. In that abyss of loss, a terrifying clarity emerges. He understands the choice now, in its entirety. He can release his grip on the Heartstone's power. He can let its cold fire die within him, and his remaining memories, the tattered, precious remnants of his life, will be safe. But without its energy, his body will succumb to his wound in moments, and Carthos's victory will be absolute. His people will be hunted down and erased, and the story of Amon Ereb will end here, in this hall of broken things. Or he can embrace the loss. He can open the floodgates and let the stone consume everything that is left. He can sacrifice not just his life, but his very self, every last echo of King Valerius, to fuel one final, impossible act. He looks from the fading portrait of his son to the broken statue of his ancestor, from the tapestry of his coronation to the woven image of his lost queen. These are not just his memories, they are the kingdom's memories. They are the story of Amon Ereb. His story is but one thread in that grand tapestry. If his thread must be pulled out, unraveled completely to preserve the rest of the design, then that is a trade he will make. His people's stories, their births, their loves, their struggles, their futures, must live on. Their history does not need to remember his name. It simply needs to continue. A profound, heartbreaking peace settles over him. The struggle ceases. The fear of oblivion vanishes, replaced by a purpose so pure it transcends the self. He makes his choice. He lets go. He willingly opens his mind and his soul to the stone, offering up the last vestiges of who he was. The face of his son vanishes completely, leaving only a fierce, nameless love. The memory of Alara dissolves into a gentle, formless warmth. The pride of his coronation becomes a simple, unwavering sense of duty. The stone drinks deeply, and its power surges within him one last time, not as a borrowed force, but as a final, devastating conversion of a soul into energy. He rises. The wound in his side is still there, but it is a distant fact. The weariness is gone. His body is now a vessel for a single, culminating purpose. He turns back toward the throne room, toward the sound of Carthos's gloating victory. As he walks, he places a hand on the cold stone wall of his fortress. He can feel the deep, ancient song of Amon Ereb, the very ley lines the scroll described, humming beneath his fingers. He understands now that the Heartstone was never a weapon, it was a key. A key to the foundational energy of the land itself, and he is going to turn it. He channels the entirety of the immense power, the sum total of his life, his loves and his losses, not into his sword, but down through his feet, into the stone floor. He pours it into the heart of the mountain, into the ancient, sleeping power beneath the fortress. He is not attacking Carthos. He is attacking the ground upon which they all stand. The great hall begins to tremble, a deep, subterranean groan that shakes dust from the highest arches. A crack snakes its way up the far wall, splitting a tapestry of a historic treaty in two. The floor beneath General Carthos's feet shifts, and his triumphant smile falters, replaced by a flicker of confusion and then dawning, horrified understanding. The king is not making a final stand. He is bringing the entire mountain down upon them all. Stumbling backward into the open air of the central courtyard, Valerius collapses to his knees on the cold flagstones. The world swims around him, a blur of smoke and torchlight. The power that had been a cold, electric current within him now becomes a storm it can no longer contain. It erupts, a wave of pure, silent energy, visible only as a shimmering distortion in the air, pulses outward from his body in a perfect circle. It passes through the advancing line of enemy soldiers not as a physical blow, but as a psychic shockwave. Men clad in iron plate armor cry out and stumble, as if the ground has vanished beneath their feet, their minds reeling from a sudden, inexplicable surge of vertigo and dread. Their disciplined charge breaks apart into confusion, buying him precious, shuddering breaths. The cost of that final expenditure is absolute. As the wave recedes, so too does the last of the Heartstone's borrowed strength, and with it, the final anchors of his own mind. The clarity that had guided his sword hand is gone, replaced by a thick, disorienting fog. He feels frail, hollowed out, a shell that has been scraped clean. He tries to grasp a coherent thought, to remember why he is here, why his side aches with a sharp, fiery pain, but his memories are like leaves scattered in a gale. They swirl just out of reach, fragmented and distant. He knows he is a king, but the weight of the crown is a forgotten sensation. He knows he fought for his people, but their faces are smudged portraits in a burned gallery. And then, from the depths of that fog, a single image emerges, clear and bright. It is not the face of a subject or a soldier, but the face of the young mother from the great hall, her eyes wide with fear, but also with a fierce, protective love for the child, clutched to her chest. Another follows, an old blacksmith who had presented him with his first practice sword, his gnarled hands rough but his smile kind. Then a young guard, barely more than a boy, who had stood his ground on the wall until the very last moment. They come to him not as a faceless crowd he was sworn to protect, but as individuals, each with their own story, their own hopes. They are not his responsibility, they are his family. A love so vast and profound that it transcends memory itself fills the void the stone has left behind. He understands now, with a certainty that needs no past to justify it, that his true strength was never in his royal blood, his strategic mind, or even the mythical power of a stone. It was always in this, the simple, unwavering love for his kingdom, and every soul within it. This love is the one thing the Heartstone could not take, because it is not a memory to be stored. It is the very core of who he is. This newfound clarity cuts through the disorientation, sharp and purposeful. His body is broken, his mind is stripped, but his will remains, fueled by this pure, final emotion. He knows what he must do, pushing himself upright with a groan that is more spirit than sound. He turns his gaze inward, toward the heart of the fortress. His eyes, once clouded, now fix on a specific, massive archway that leads to the undercrofts. There, hidden in the oldest masonry, are the ancient collapse mechanisms, the final, desperate design of the original builders, meant to deny the fortress to any conqueror. It was never meant to be used, a lesson spoken of in whispers by military historians, and always dismissed as a myth too dark to consider. He begins to move, each step an agony of torn muscle and shattered bone. He does not run, he marches, a slow, deliberate funeral procession of one. He passes enemy soldiers who are still shaking off the effects of the psychic blast, and they look at him with a strange mixture of fear and confusion. This bleeding, broken man who moves with the unstoppable resolve of a tidal wave. They do not try to stop him. He is no longer a threat they understand. He reaches the archway and places his hands upon the cold stone of a particular pillar, his fingers finding a series of deep, worn indentations that are not natural erosion, but a coded key. With the last vestige of his physical strength, he presses the sequence, a final, forgotten prayer of the Masons. A deep, groaning shudder passes through the entire mountain. It starts in the deepest foundations, a visceral tremor that is felt before it is heard. High above, a shower of dust and small fragments of mortar rains down from the vaulted ceilings, followed by the sharper, more terrifying sound of cracking stone. The great hall, the throne room, the galleries, all begin to groan in protest, the ancient bones of Aminareb awakening to their final, terrible purpose. The invaders' shouts of victory turn to cries of alarm as the very ground beneath their feet shifts, and the walls they fought so hard to breach begin to sway. King Valerius slumps against the pillar, his task complete, watching as the world he fought for begins to fall, ensuring it will never serve as a trophy for the man who sought to erase it. The psychic shockwave that had bought him a few precious moments finally recedes, leaving behind a ringing silence in his mind and a sea of disoriented enemies. Valerius knows this confusion is temporary, a fleeting window of opportunity measured in heartbeats. His body screams in protest with every movement, a symphony of pain from his shattered armor and the deep, throbbing wound in his side, but he forces himself to move. He is drawn not to a defensible position or a hidden route, but to the one place that holds the ultimate symbolic weight, the main gate of Aminareb. This was the threshold of his kingdom, the archway through which traders, diplomats, and hopeful citizens had once streamed. Now it will serve as the final barrier between the hunters and the hunted. He stations himself directly in the center of the ruined gateway, his boots planted on the cracked flagstones where the massive doors once stood. Behind him is the freedom of the night and the distant, fading hope of his people. Before him is the crumbling chaos of the fortress and the entire force of an enraged enemy. The ground continues to shudder, great chunks of masonry breaking free from the high walls and crashing down around the courtyard in clouds of dust and debris. He pays the falling stone no mind. His entire world has narrowed to this archway. He is no longer a king fighting for a victory. He is a sentinel ensuring a sacrifice is complete. The first wave of soldiers to recover from the disorienting blast see him there, a solitary, bleeding figure standing defiantly in their only clear path to escape. They charge, driven by panic and the primal need to flee the collapsing mountain. Valerius meets them without a sound. There are no battle cries, no shouted challenges, only the grim, efficient work of a man who has become an instrument of finality. His sword moves with a grace that belies his injuries, a precise and deadly dance that cuts down the first two attackers before they can even fully raise their shields. A third soldier tries to rush past his flank, and Valerius pivots, his blade a silver flash in the torchlight, and the man falls. He does not move from his spot. He is the immovable object, and their desperate tide breaks against him. General Carthos, from his position in the quaking Great Hall, finally pieces together the full, horrifying scope of the king's strategy. This was never about a last stand for glory. It was a meticulously laid trap, and they are all caught inside it. The king isn't just bringing down the fortress, he is using the chaos as a weapon, herding them like cattle toward a single, deadly choke point that he himself guards. The reports of blocked passages and collapsing corridors now make a terrible sense. A cold, unprecedented fear grips the general's heart, not a fear of death, but a fear of absolute, humiliating failure. His victory has turned to ash and dust around him. With a voice raw with fury and frustration, he bellows the order he never thought he would utter. Retreat. Fall back to the gate, full retreat, but his command is a whisper against the thunder of the dying mountain. The order is too late. The pathways his army used to enter are now sealed under tons of collapsed rock and twisted timber. The main gate is not just an exit, it is the only exit, and standing in it is the one man in all the world who will not let them pass. His soldiers, hearing the retreat order, turn and surge toward the gateway, only to meet the same, unforgiving steel. Valerius becomes a whirlwind of controlled, brutal motion, his body pushed far beyond its limits by a will that is now entirely separate from flesh and bone. He is a wall, he is a storm, he is the final judgment of Amon Ereb. High above, the sky itself seems to bear witness to the end, the stars blotted out by a rising plume of dust and smoke that chokes the air. The world darkens, the only light coming from the scattered, guttering torches and the eerie, faint glow of the settling dust. The battlefield is no longer a courtyard, but a collapsing tomb, and at its entrance, the last king of a fallen realm fights on, each movement slower than the last, each breath a ragged gasp, but his resolve an unbreakable chain across the archway. Stone and shadow descend upon them all, and the final, defiant silhouette of the king is the last thing to be consumed by the darkness. The central tower of Amon Ereb, that proud finger of stone that had pointed toward the heavens for centuries, groans its final protest. A deep, internal crack rends the air, a sound more felt than heard, as the immense structure begins its slow, inevitable topple toward the earth. The world seems to hold its breath. In that suspended moment, King Valerius turns his gaze away from the chaos, away from the crumbling stone and the terrified enemy. He looks out, beyond the shattered walls, across the moonlit plains to the distant, dark line of the forests. He cannot see them, not a single soul, but he knows. He knows they are there, moving under the sheltering canopy, their hearts beating with the terror and hope of the free. And in that knowing, a profound and quiet victory settles within him. It is not a smile of triumph, but one of release, a faint, gentle curve of his lips that holds the weight of an entire kingdom's delivered promise. They are safe. From the swirling dust and madness, a final, enraged figure emerges. General Carthos, his armor dented and his face a mask of soot and fury, charges one last time. There is no strategy left, no calculated feint. This is pure, unadulterated hatred given form, a desperate lunge to claim one final thing from the king who has stolen his victory. Valerius turns to meet him, his own body screaming in protest. But the Heartstone's cold fire is now only a memory, a departed guest that has left the house empty. There is no amplified speed, no preternatural clarity. There is only the man. The king raises his notched and weary blade with the last vestiges of his own mortal will, the strength born not of magic, but of a lifetime of discipline and a love that has outlasted memory itself. Their blades meet in a shower of sparks, a last, desperate clangor against the symphony of destruction. It is a raw and brutal exchange, stripped of all artifice. Valerius parries a wild slash, the impact shuddering up his arm, and answers with a thrust that Carthos barely deflects. They are two forces of nature in their final conflict, one representing conquest and the other sacrifice. They trade blow for blow, their movements slowing as the world collapses around them, each strike a punctuation mark in the last sentence of their story. The ground beneath them lurches violently as the full weight of the falling tower strikes the earth, and a massive section of the fortified inner wall, destabilized by the shock wave, shears away from its foundations. It comes down upon them like the hand of an angry giant, a deluge of stone and mortar that offers no quarter. There is no time to dodge, no space to flee. The final clash is ended not by a sword stroke, but by the crushing weight of the mountain itself, pinning both king and general beneath its immutable judgment. In the absolute darkness and the suffocating pressure, a final, quiet miracle occurs. The roar of the collapse, the screams of the doomed, the grinding of stone on stone, it all fades into a gentle, receding whisper. What rises to meet him in the silence is not a sound from the present, but a perfect, crystalline echo from the past. It is the sound of his son's laughter, pure and unrestrained, ringing as clear as if the boy were right beside him. It is a memory the Heartstone, for all its consuming power, could not find and could not take, because it was not stored in the mind, but etched directly upon the soul. It was the one treasure he had protected, the anchor to his own humanity. Hearing it now, he feels no pain, no fear of the end. He feels only an immense, all-encompassing peace, the deep satisfaction of a task fully completed, and a love perfectly honored. He closes his eyes not in defeat, but in acceptance, carried into the quiet on the sound of that joyful, remembered laughter. And then, silence, a deep, profound, and absolute silence, falls over the ruins of Amon Ereb. The dust slowly begins to settle, blanketing the terrible new landscape in a soft, gray shroud. The night wind, which had been whipped into a frenzy by the collapse, now sighs as it moves through the shattered stones, the only mourner at this vast funeral. The fortress is gone, the army is gone, the king is gone. All that remains is the mountain, forever altered, and the stories that will now begin their long journey out into the world, carried on the breaths of those who survive to tell them. For days, they move through the darkness, a silent procession of the saved, guided only by the faint light of the stars and the memory of the king's final command to flee. Every snap of a twig, every gust of wind through the trees, sent a jolt of terror through the group, their ears straining for the sounds of pursuit that never came. They expected at any moment to hear the baying of hounds or the thunder of cavalry, but the forest around them remained strangely, blessedly silent. It was as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. Finally, the trees began to thin, and the ground sloped downward into a wide, sheltered valley, cradled by protective hills and bisected by a clear, rushing stream. Exhausted, wounded, and hollowed by loss, they stumbled into the sanctuary of this new land, collapsing onto the soft grass, their bodies giving way to the sheer relief of survival. It was there, on the third morning, as the sun rose over the eastern ridge, that the oldest among them, a white-haired historian who had saved nothing but the clothes on his back, pointed a trembling finger back the way they had come. A great brown cloud of dust still hung in the air high above the distant peaks, a silent tombstone marking the grave of the mountain and the kingdom it had borne. There were no cheers at their deliverance, no celebrations for their hard-won freedom. Instead, a profound, shared silence fell over the group, a silence filled with the unspoken understanding of the price that had been paid for their presence in this green and peaceful place. They had lost everything: their homes, their history, their sovereign, and yet they had gained something immeasurable, a future, and in that future, the story began to change. Around the cooking fires that night, they did not speak of King Valerius as a tragic figure who had lost his throne. They did not tell a tale of a crushing military defeat. The conversation turned instead to the man who had held the line. They spoke of the king who had personally ushered them into the dark passage, his face smudged with soot, but his eyes clear and calm. They recounted the impossible rumor, passed by the last guards to fall, of a single, blazing fire atop the highest tower, a beacon that had captured the entire enemy army's attention. They wove together the fragments of what they knew and what they felt into a new narrative, one not of an ending, but of a supreme, conscious choice. His was not a story of a kingdom falling, but of a king who chose to stand until he could stand no more, so that they might live to sit in safety. This new story took root with astonishing speed, becoming the bedrock of their fledgling community. The children, too young to fully grasp the horror of the siege, were the first to embrace the legend in its purest form. Their games in the meadows of the new valley were no longer about conquering imaginary forts, but about defending them. They would take turns being King Valerius, standing with a stick for a sword on a small hillock, holding back an entire army of play-acted invaders so their friends could escape to the safety of the forest. In their innocent reenactments, the king never truly died. He simply faded into a hero of myth, his sacrifice an act of timeless courage. The elders, understanding the profound need for a foundation upon which to build their new society, eagerly took up the mantle of storytellers. On long evenings, they would gather the community and tell the tale not as a history lesson of dates and battles, but as a parable of character. They spoke of the king's loyalty, his resolve, and his ultimate selflessness, weaving these virtues into the very identity of their people. The Fall of Amon Ereb was no longer a date to be mourned. It became their origin story, the courage of one man in their darkest hour, became the standard against which all future actions would be measured, the invisible cornerstone of their new home. His sacrifice was the seed from which their new laws, their new sense of community, and their new hope would grow. And so, the story lived. It traveled with traders along new routes. It was carried by travelers to distant lands, and it was sung by bards in halls far from the silent mountain. Amon Ereb, the forgotten battlefield, was forgotten no more. It was remembered instead as a testament, a permanent reminder that the true measure of a leader is not found in the riches of their treasury or the strength of their walls, but in the depth of their love for their people and their willingness to become the foundation upon which a new future is built, even if they themselves cannot live to see it rise. The circle of iron and hatred tightens around him, the snarling faces of the enemy illuminated by the erratic, dying pulse of light that still bleeds from the cracks in his broken armor. The Heartstone's power is a guttering candle within his chest, its brilliant flame now reduced to a faint, fading ember. He can feel its last vestiges flickering, a final breath of energy waiting to be spent. With a strength that is no longer physical, King Valerius pushes himself to his feet, his movements slow, deliberate, and filled with a grace that belies the ruin of his body. He does not raise his sword toward the encircling enemy. Instead, he turns the blade inward, holding it vertically before his face in a formal, ancient salute. This gesture is not for them. It is a final, silent communion. The polished steel of the blade, now notched and stained, reflects not his own worn face, but the ghosts of all he holds dear. In its surface, he sees the hopeful faces of the people he ushered to safety, the steadfast loyalty of the guards who fell at his side, the wise eyes of his ancestors whose portraits line the archive walls, and the deep, abiding spirit of the land itself, the rolling hills, the whispering forests, the very soil of Amon Ereb that he loved more than life. It is a farewell to a world he saved, a history he preserved, and a future he will never see. He then reverses his grip on the sword, and with a final, monumental effort of will, he drives the point downward, not into an enemy, but into the very stone at his feet. This is the catalyst. He channels the very last spark of the Heartstone's energy, not outward in a blast of destruction, but inward and downward, a focused spear of intention sent deep into the heart of the mountain. He gives it all, every remaining shred of the stone's power, every last memory it hadn't already consumed, every final ounce of his own spirit. He pours it directly into the foundational ley lines, the ancient veins of power that the scroll had described, overloading them with a force they were never meant to bear. The effect is instantaneous and cataclysmic. The ground does not simply shake, it convulses. A deep, groaning roar erupts from the bowels of the mountain, a sound of the earth itself being torn asunder. A great crack, wide and dark, snakes its way through the courtyard, swallowing screaming soldiers and shattered statues alike. The high walls of the inner keep, already weakened by siege and sacrifice, sway like weary giants before succumbing to gravity's call. Tons of ancient masonry begin to rain down, and the very air turns thick with dust and the thunder of a world ending. Through this chaos, his gaze finds that of General Carthos. The general is no longer a figure of cold triumph. His face is a mask of stunned disbelief, then raw, panicked fury as he understands the totality of his defeat. He has won nothing. He has conquered only a tomb. Valerius looks upon him, and in his eyes there is no hatred, no gloating victory. There is only a profound, heartbreaking pity. The general fought for land, for power, for a name in the history books of a foreign empire. Valerius fought for the intangible, the eternal, for love, for memory, for the simple, enduring right of his people to exist and remember. He pities the general because the man will die having never understood what truly mattered, having never fought for anything more lasting than his own ambition. A massive section of the fortified wall shears away from its foundations, its shadow falling over them like a final curtain. In that last second, as the darkness descends, a perfect, impossible peace settles over Valerius. The roar of the collapsing world fades into a distant whisper. His work is done. His promise is kept. He closes his eyes not on the crushing stone, but on the memory of a sun-drenched valley and the sound of his people's laughter, a sound he ensured would live on long after his name was forgotten. The fortress falls, and the king is swallowed by the dust of his sacrifice, but from that very dust, his true legacy begins its eternal rise. Generations have turned since the dust settled over the ruins of Amon Ereb, and in a quiet valley, cradled by the same mountains, a new community has taken root, not as a reconstruction of what was lost, but as a living seed grown from its lessons. The people here do not build high walls or stockpile weapons. Their security is woven from a different fabric entirely, one of mutual trust, shared responsibility, and a profound understanding that the strength of a community is measured by its care for the weakest among them. Their laws, debated in the open air under a great oak tree, are not decrees handed down from a distant ruler, but collective agreements forged from the story that defines them, a story that every child learns not as a history of defeat, but as a founding myth of resilience and love. At the very heart of the village green stands a statue, simple in its design, yet overwhelming in its emotional impact. It is not a monument to martial triumph. The King Valerius captured here is not clad in ornate armor, nor does he hold a sword aloft in victory. Instead, he is carved from the same stone as the mountain that was his tomb, depicted simply as a man. His head is slightly raised, his gaze fixed steadily on the distant horizon, his expression one of quiet resolve and profound, unbreakable hope. One hand is extended, not in a gesture of command, but as if he is ushering someone to safety, his posture protective yet forward-looking. This is how they remember him, not as a conqueror, but as a guardian. The inscription at the base is short, echoing the last lesson he taught them. True strength is measured in sacrifice, not victory. For the children who play around its base, the statue is a familiar part of the landscape, a silent playmate in their games. They are too young to grasp the full weight of its meaning, yet they absorb its essence unconsciously. Their heroes are not warriors who win great battles, but those who show great kindness and courage in protecting others. The story of the king who fought alone is their bedtime story, a tale that teaches that the most powerful magic in the world is not found in stones or swords, but in the choice to stand for something greater than oneself. They grow up in the long, peaceful shadow of that ultimate sacrifice, and it shapes their character in ways they may never fully articulate, but which are evident in the way they treat one another. The elders, the few who carry the fading, first-hand memories of that desperate flight through the dark tunnel, often come to sit on the benches near the statue in the cool of the evening. They do not speak of the terror or the bloodshed to the young ones. Instead, they speak of the king's calm voice in the chaos, the steady look in his eyes as he pointed the way to life. They have refined the story over the years, sanding away the sharp edges of horror to reveal the polished core of its meaning. In their telling, Amon Ereb did not fall, it was transformed. Its stones did not crash down in defeat, but settled into a sacred cairn, a permanent memorial to the price that was paid for their peace. The battlefield itself is now forgotten by the wider world, overgrown by forest and time, known only to the birds and the wind. But for this village, that forgotten field is the cornerstone of their world. They know that some kingdoms are not defined by borders or palaces, but by the values that outlive them. King Valerius's true reign did not end in the crumbling courtyard of his fortress. It began in the hearts of those he saved, and it continues in the spirit of every generation that follows. He rules from the stories told by the fire, from the lessons taught to the children, from the unwavering belief that a single act of profound courage can echo through centuries. His lonely, defiant stand ensured that his people would not just survive, but that they would thrive with a purpose. Their community, a living testament to the idea that a kingdom never truly dies so long as its story is told with